guests should not be concerned with how was this created. They should just be in the experience and enjoying it. So we don't want them to really think about, it's funny, looking back to when I started going to theme parks, I never really thought about, wow, who created the sound or how did this get here? I just knew that I loved it and I was having such a great time in the experience. And that's what we really want to do. We want the guests just to let go, not have to think about how was something created, but just experience it and fall in love with it.
Welcome to the AttractionPros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the AttractionPros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's fantastic, Josh. How are you?
Right. Yeah. I am doing great. Really excited for our guest today. But first, quick question for you. What is your favorite theme park or attraction sound?
Sound. Wow. That's a tough one.
Mm-hmm. There's so many.
There are so many. You're right. Right. I have to say, does it have to be an attraction that's still open?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to say that one of my favorites was at the time, what was it called? MGM, Disney MGM, right? Which is now Hollywood Studios. So they had the sound effects theater thing, and you could go into those little recording booths, right?
Yeah.
And you put on the headphones, and they had something called binaural recording, which is where they had a head and they had microphones in the ears that were like omnidirectional, so that you could hear everything like in 360 degree sound. And there was like somebody cutting your hair, and it would feel like they were cutting your hair right behind you. And it was just a really, really cool sonic experience. And for a sound nerd, that was really cool.
That is a fantastic answer. Thank you. I knew you would have something good.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite sound?
Not nearly as cool as yours, but I was going to say, a chain link from a roller coaster is always phenomenal. And also I would say on any Intamin launch coaster, particularly Top Thrill Dragster, the sound of the brakes going down,
Yep,
has always been really cool. Now, those are, I would say, natural sounds that are produced from those rides directly. But if we continue on this theme from Dragster, once the brakes go down and there's the visuals, there's kind of the Christmas tree lights, red, yellow, green. Once it launches, if the sound effects aren't on, that train is almost silent. But because of you hear like the tires screeching, and it sounds like a very noisy car has just taken off. And that's always just been, and by the way, if it's like late at night and like most of the other rides are closed, but it's still cycling, you can hear that sound almost anywhere in the park. And I've always found that to be really, really cool. And how that, along with all the other, I would say, artificial sounds and music as well, and the sound effects that you described from that sound effect experience, really drives the experience, and I would say directs the guest towards the intended emotional feeling that the designers, the developers are seeking from building rides, attractions, or any immersive experience.
And we get to get granular on that today with Brian Yessian from Yessian Music. He goes into all kinds of details that I love as I said, as a sound nerd and as a guy who's got a lot of experience in a recording studio. To hear him talk about the music and the sound effects and how much work and detail goes into creating an immersive sonic experience that I think most people probably take for granted is really, really incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And for someone who does not have nearly the same amount of experience with sound or with mixing, I thoroughly enjoyed learning about the entire process that goes into it and really connecting it to what I love talking about a lot, and that is the guest experience. And Brian talks about the emotional reaction that guests get when they get off one of these attractions, and being able to see how the guest was able to connect with it without even thinking about the music or even the sound that so many hours were invested into making sure it is exactly perfect. So we're going to talk all about that today. So listen up, because let's get straight to this interview with Brian Yessian.
Brian Yessian, thank you so much for joining us today on the Attraction Pros podcast. How are you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So excited to jump into this conversation. You and I have kind of the sound background that I'm so excited to talk about. We may nerd out a little bit on that, so I apologize now to the audience. But can you talk a little bit about Yessian Music and how you got involved with attractions?
Sure. So our company is actually, this is our 50th year in business. My father, Dan Yessian, started the company in 1971 in a actually renovated bait and tackle store in the Detroit area. And he had to rip out the fishing bait wells and kind of start his little studio. He's a musician. He started out as a jingle writer in the 70s and 80s in Detroit, working for automotive industry and advertising agencies. And really kind of focus on that in the Detroit area. And then my brother and I actually got involved probably about 23, 24 years ago now. And I actually never intended to come into the business. I was a classical clarinet player, studying music and performing in orchestra, but kind of had that urge and got sucked into what my dad was doing. And for my brother and I, we really wanted to expand the company outside of Detroit. And we started into New York and then Los Angeles and Hamburg, Germany, where we have a full studio facility in Germany now as well, handling all the European market. And it was probably about 15 years ago when we were working on a project in Cincinnati, Ohio, of all places, for a local TV commercial. And producer there of the project, she had a production company. Her name is Anita Doherty. She works at Jack Rouse Associates at the time on the side, now full time there. And she pulled us into a project for the Fort Siloso Museum in Singapore, creating the music for the film, and really didn't think much about it, didn't really even realize about creating music for attractions or museums or immersive experiences at the time. And as we got further into this project, I thought, wow, I wonder if there's more work like this out there, because we had worked for longer format films in the automotive industry or reveals of cars. And lo and behold, there was a really big industry out there for this. So she was really our introduction and into this industry, and brought us into several other projects over the years, from Ferrari World in Abu Dhabi to, we just finished a project in New York with her for the Friends experience, immersive experience in New York. And started getting into the IAPA circuit and meeting a lot of people in the industry. And here we are, 15 years later, we're working all over the world on attractions, which has been amazing. And for me, kind of a dream come true, because I grew up going to Disney and Universal and always had such an affinity for those parks. So it's pretty exciting.
That is really exciting. Thanks for sharing that. So just curious, what are some of the maybe unique elements of producing music and sound for attractions that maybe aren't necessarily as involved with, like I said, feature films or automotive reveals? I've got to imagine there's a lot of similarities, maybe trying to convey a particular emotion or, kind of deliver that experience in that same way. So I can see there being a lot of similarities. What were maybe some of the things that maybe you hadn't anticipated, or what were some new elements of that music production and sound design?
Yeah, well, you're right. There is, music brings this emotional quality to the film. And whenever we're creating, whether it be for a TV commercial or a automotive reveal or a TV show or a film, we're always trying to enhance the picture and support the picture, and then bring some kind of emotional quality to it. And the same is true for themed attraction work as well. However, with themed attraction work, you're taking this idea, and at the time, most things were just in stereo or a 5.1 surround mix. But with themed attractions, we're talking about sound on a whole new level with immersive audio AV systems, surround sound that is not just 5.1 or 7.1, but 32.1 or even beyond, because you're working in Dolby Atmos or proprietary type speaker setups. So we're really trying to take sound to a much more immersive level and a more realism level. So when you step into an environment, you want to make this environment sound as real as possible, so that you're tricking the mind and you're really able to give a full audio perspective of this attraction. And so I think for us, when we came into this industry, the on-site component and on-site mixing and what we have to do in the field became a whole new level for us. And I mean, we've learned so much over these years about how that process works and getting into the details and why it's so important to be mixing on-site in the venue, because of these environments and immersive qualities that we can bring to the guests.
So Brian, can you peel back that onion, as Josh liked to say a little bit, when you talk about mixing?
Yeah, we both do.
I know, you're right. As you talk about mixing in that environment, because I think probably most people can at least picture a recording studio, right, where there's speakers and you've got the console. But it sounds like you're mixing in the environment that people are going to be in. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, whenever we start a project and getting into the recording process and the mixing process, we're still in the studio. We're in our basic, we have the full console where we have our recording studios where we're recording musicians and singers and different instrumentalists for the project, or voiceover actors. And we can take it to a certain level. When you're in a controlled studio environment, sure, it sounds great in there. But when you go to a large warehouse or a queue area that has 30-foot ceilings, or a theater that is larger than life, and you're working with all types of speakers and acoustical treatments, if you just deliver that studio mix into that environment, it's not going to translate, because you're in a completely different room. The way the acoustics are working in the room are completely different than what the controlled studio environment is. So what we do is we actually take our studio to the location. So we're taking a full Pro Tools rigs with our computers, our outboard sound gear, our software, and setting up in the environment so that we can mix through the AV system and really dial it in so that the acoustics and the sounds and everything that we heard in the studio translates to the actual environment. And it's so important. A lot of people don't realize how valuable that is and what it brings to the experience. And what we like to spend as much time as possible on site, because that's where the real magic happens, and that's where we can bring the attraction to life.
Yeah.
So for someone who might not know as much about music production or sound production, what's the reason for needing to do that on site versus being able to do it off site, and then making sure that the hardware and the speaker system and all of that is set up correctly? What are what are some of the things that could go wrong if you don't do it on site and being in that environment?
Well, one thing is just the hardware itself. We're working with different speaker systems in our studios compared to what's on site. So we really have to make sure that we know what the speaker sounds like, what it's capable of, and how we can utilize it to its fullest capacity on site. I think a lot of times, we like to get involved actually as early in the process as possible and be working with the AV vendor. We find it really important to kind of know what the system is capable of before we even start composing the music, so that it's going to translate the right way. If we realize that these speakers are only going to have a certain threshold of sound output, then we realize that, God, if we put too much low end in there or too much high end, it's not going to project correctly through the system. But if we can talk with the AV company, and a lot of times we're kind of consulting with them to talk about what are the capabilities, what are our creative intentions for the project, and how can we work together to make sure we have the best possible system for the end, the best end result. So when we go on site, it's really important to dial all of that in and take into account the acoustics of the room, the shape of the room, the way that the guests will move through the room, and how do we pull them through that experience by mixing it in the environment. And I think overall just having a better and a more immersive guest experience.
So are there ways that you simulate having guests in there, because people absorb the sound, right? And it might sound different when you get, 100 people in that room versus having nobody in the room.
Yeah, there's a lot of testing that has to go into that, because you're absolutely right. When we're mixing, and right now we're mixing this attraction here in Pigeon Forge at night, when it's very quiet and there's nobody in there, there's nobody talking or making noise, because we know when guests get in line, there's a lot of talking, you're close to people, the bodies absorb that sound. So we have to take that all into account with the levels that we're setting, and then going through kind of a testing process where, hopefully on these projects, there's times when they'll do like a trial run and bring some guests through and bring some bodies into the environment, so that we can listen to it and then make our notes on what needs to be changed or tweaked depending on how the acoustics of the room are reacting to actual physical people in that room as well.
Yeah.
So once you see the physical space and you know what the parameters are and what the limitations are and what you need to do from that production standpoint, what happens next? How do you then know what it is? What is the tone? And you mentioned the creative intention earlier. Do you then work with the creative team and determine where do we want to take the guest on their journey at this particular point in the attraction, or if they're walking through the experience, to make sure that the actual music and what the guest is now sensing aligns specifically with what the overall design and the intent, like you mentioned, creative intention earlier,
Sure.
of what that is supposed to be and deliver that output.
Absolutely. I mean, we're working with the content creators and the storytellers and the copywriters and the art directors to understand what is the story, what are we trying to convey, how does it start from the time that people enter the guest experience in the queue area, the retail space, the entrance lobby, through the queue. What's the story we're trying to tell? How do we pull people through and keep that story progressing and moving forward as they move through the queue, so that they're getting a full experience from the time that they enter the building or the queue area, all the way through to the pre-show, to the safety video, and then to finally the main attraction. So really, we sit with the storytellers, the content creators, the creative directors, and go through kind of what we would call a charrette in the beginning, and just really kind of dissect everything and talk about the story and what are we trying to achieve here. And then internally at our place, we start talking with our composing team and our sound designers, and how are we going to develop the story around this creative that's been in concept phase. And then it's a lot of trial and error. We start writing things down. We create demos and start giving music styles to the team to review and decide which path we want to take with the music, and how are we going to tell the story. And then at some point, they have to film some of the media first before we can go too far, because a lot of what we do from the music side is we're scoring to picture still, we're scoring to their story. So we have to, from a music or a sound perspective, we're supporting the content that we're actually visually seeing. There's also content that we're not visually seeing that we're creating from an audio perspective only. So that work can kind of be in process. And then as we move through the process with composition, especially, it's a lot of back and forth and scoring to the film. We take it kind of step by step with the music composition process, and then have a good setup of feedback and creating the content and seeing it to the hopefully a final recording phase as well.
So Brian, you mentioned you're on site right now at a new attraction. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so we are here in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, working on a new project at the island here, together with Dynamic Attractions, and Craftwork is the AV company on this. It's a new attraction, a new fly attraction called Skyfly Soar America. And it's America's newest fly ride, which is very exciting for us. And we've had the opportunity to work on several fly rides. I think this is our 15th fly attraction that we've worked on around the globe. And one that we're just really excited about because first off, it's here in America, so we get to be in our home country working and working in a really amazing part of the country that not a lot of people maybe know about. Well, actually, a lot of people do know about it because it's packed. I mean, there are so many people here that come to Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg, Tennessee to experience this area. And it's a beautiful area of the country, right in the middle of the Smoky Mountains. Dollywood's just up the street. And so this is going to be a new standalone attraction at the island. And I think it's going to be something really unique for people in this part of the country. So we're very excited about it.
You mentioned dynamic attractions. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with dynamic?
Yes. So we've been working, it's funny, we've been working with dynamic, I think, since the very beginning of our attraction work, good 13, 14 years ago. Working on flying theaters with them. And we've never been hired directly by Dynamic in the past until this project, but they've always been one of our most trusted partners in the industry because, the quality of craftsmanship and what they put into it creatively is by far they create some of the best attractions in the world. And working with their teams over the years, we've always had a very close relationship with them because they are a company that just really respects the audio process and what needs to happen in order to make the attraction really sing, I guess you could say, no pun intended. And their teams really collaborate with our teams very well. So we've had just a long history of working together with them. And this attraction, now that they've kind of gone into dynamic entertainment and they're kind of taking over more creative control of the process, we're just very fortunate to be their partner in this project and being kind of creatively led by their teams there on this one.
So Brian, speaking of this project in particular, I read that you're using the full Nashville Orchestra. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So is that unusual for a ride soundtrack to use the full orchestra?
It's not unusual. It is. It adds another cost layer to the project, but I think it's a cost layer that just brings so much value to the overall experience. We've had the great fortune of working with a lot of live orchestras around the world for experiences from London to Budapest, Prague, China, Seattle. And it always brings this higher level of quality and craftsmanship to the music experience. The parks like Disney and Universal Studios, they're using live orchestras for almost every attraction they do. Smaller parks, smaller experiences might not have the budget for that. And we do a lot of sample orchestral creation for projects all the time, and it turns out great. But when you can bring a live orchestra into the fold, it makes a huge impact, especially for the guest experience. And I think the return and investment in that, I think you really can't put a price tag on that because I think it brings something so special and this human quality to what we do. In this case, we were so fortunate to have the Nashville Orchestra players here in the home state of Tennessee and connect that to this attraction. We've worked with Nashville for many years, full orchestras, choirs. The musicians, it's Nashville. So you just have this great pick of the world's best musicians. And then working at Ocean Way Studios in Nashville, where some of the greatest artists have recorded over the years, is like the cherry on the ice cream. So we're very fortunate for this project to be able to make that connection between the players in Nashville to Pigeon Forge and this attraction at Skyfly, and keep it kind of a home state type project.
So you mentioned the difference in the impact between working with the full orchestra or just producing that offsite in the studio. Can you expand a little bit on what really the difference is that would be sensed by the guest as well, and just the overall increase in quality to the final product?
Sure. So when we're creating a sampled orchestra, we're basically working in our computer, and we have great sample libraries that we utilize that we can replicate full orchestra sound, and we're programming all of that in our computer system to make it feel as real as possible, and the samples are coming from real players from around the world that we are utilizing to kind of put this together. But it's always a bit more, we're talking about computer crafting and working within a system like Pro Tools or Logic that we're composing in. When we get to work with live players, it really brings this sense of humanity, this expression and dynamics that you can't compare to a sampled library orchestra. And we're recording them. The way we recorded this one, for example, we set up the room in the microphones. I was telling someone the other day that the microphones at Ocean Way studios have one of the best microphone collections in the world. I mean, vintage microphones, old German microphones that they use, and and Decatrees set up. So Decatrees are arrays of microphones. So you're getting this fully immersive kind of sound experience when we record, because we are projecting this through a large channel speaker system, and it's supposed to be very immersive. So when we can record that way and record the orchestra with microphones, there's point source microphones on the individual instruments, there's the room tone microphones, there's the Decatrees that are set up, and we can create and record in this kind of immersive environment from the get-go. And so when we can bring that kind of recording quality to an experience like this, it's really going, and then projected through a fantastic speaker system here as well, then we're just taking the quality level to a very high level for the guests. And I think we were sitting in mixing last night in the theater, and it's amazing how you can hear the difference of sampled orchestra to live orchestra just through the speaker system in the theater.
Wow. That's really cool. I can kind of feel where you're coming from, because, as a musician myself, there's breath in a real orchestra, right? That you wouldn't get coming from a computer generated one. Even though the song quality might be great, there may be no noise whatsoever, but you don't get the human quality, like you said.
Yeah. And the expression of those musicians, I mean, they put so much love and passion into what they do that you feel that emotion. I think it just heightens the emotions overall.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about, Brian, is you mentioned earlier that sometimes you're creating a soundtrack for something you don't have visuals for. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Yeah,
sure. So, when you're going through and I'll use this attraction as a great example, because when you walk into this attraction, it's very much this steampunk factory kind of feeling. And so you're going to be, when you walk into the environment, you want to walk into something that feels like a steampunk factory. And so what we're doing when you walk into the lobby of this experience is you're leaving the island at Pigeon Forge, and we want you to walk into Skyfly now. You're no longer at the island, you're in a new environment. And what we have to do from a sonic point of view is capture your attention, make your mind think that you're no longer at the island. I am now in a steampunk factory. And how do you do that? Just with pure sound, no visuals. And that's what we are doing with the sound effects and the music. And we're trying to bring people into this and immerse them into sound where they feel, and utilizing the speakers in different ways to mix it into this environment and make them really feel like they've stepped into a completely different place. And as they walk through the queue area, there are visuals that come up through the queue as well. But for as long as possible before you get to those visuals, you want to use sound to lead the guests and really trick their mind into thinking that they're in a new environment. So it's a pretty exciting process to be able to use sound, whether it be sound effects, music, little trigger points or things that might happen as you pass by it, just to again make you turn in a certain direction and keep leading the guests and pulling the guests through the experience.
That is really cool. And I enjoy hearing you explain it that way, because I feel like it makes so much sense kind of when, when you hear it sort of laid out that way. But what about for, I would say, the most passive guests who are going through this and they're not thinking about all the work that was done to, create the sound specifically for them. And I guess the question is, how do you tailor the sound and music production towards the most passive audience members, the ones who aren't necessarily going to think about it or consider it as they're going through the attraction?
Well, I think that's one of the tricks actually, is we don't want them to think about it. We don't want them to even think about that there's sound in a way that the guests should not be concerned with how was this created. They should just be in the experience and enjoying it. So we don't want them to really think about, it's funny, looking back to when I started going to theme parks, I never really thought about, wow, who created the sound or how did this get here? I just knew that I loved it and I was having such a great time in the experience. And that's what we really want to do. We want the guests just to let go, not have to think about how was something created, but just experience it and fall in love with it. So the biggest trick for us is for that passive guest or the people that don't want to really get into the science of what happened here, how was this created, just to feel an emotional connection. And that's kind of the trick with sound, is how do we connect with a broad array of guests? Because there's guests that are going to be really into how everything was created. There's going to be guests that are very passive. There's going to be guests that have different affinities for music or for sound. And sound is one of the most subjective parts of the process. Everyone has a different love or hate for what they hear, whether it be a style of music or a certain type of sound effect that might really rub someone the wrong way, or someone that really loves a certain sound. So we have to kind of take all of that into consideration and really share what we're creating with various sample groups in a way to make sure that what we're creating is going to appeal to a broad audience.
Brian, can you go back and talk to us a little bit about some of that inspiration that you had? What were some of those earlier experiences that you said, wow, this is so cool, and this is what I want to do?
So going back, I remember, for Disney, one of my favorite experiences was just throughout Epcot, and I have such an affinity for music, but also for culture and travel. So I was the Disney experience for me was all around Epcot and how you could go to all those different countries and experience and the rides and the attractions that were in those different countries, and how the music changed. And the music is a big part of making those environments feel like I'm in Mexico now, I'm in Japan now, I'm in France now. And Disney, they're the masters at doing that and making you really immersed in the experience. And so when I kind of learned more about the attraction industry and being able to mix music, my one passion, and then culture and travel, my other passion. Now, luckily I've been able to see the globe, and we've worked all over the world on various attractions and connecting with cultures. I think that's really helped us grow in this industry more as well. But I would say, Disney was my first experience in the theme park world, and really being immersed in it, in attractions, and music was a big part of that, because they were able to really pull you into those environments without you really thinking too much about it.
Yeah.
You kind of brought that full circle there, of saying that they bring you into those environments without you thinking of it. So it kind of ties into what we were talking about before, of kind of the guest, going through the experience and just feeling that connection without necessarily thinking about it. One of the things that you were telling us earlier too, even before we started recording, are those really small details, not necessarily even the music component, but certain small sound effects of the process that require a huge investment of time and resources that maybe they go by so quickly, and maybe the guest notices, maybe if they look away, or if their phone rings or something like that, then they might overlook it. Yeah. What are some of the minor details that you love that guests might might take for granted or might not, might overlook?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I was just thinking of another actually, and talking about the cue and how you don't want to or how you want to immerse guests and not really have them think too much about what's happening behind the scenes. But when we're in say a cue line and we're trying to get certain sounds to maybe pull someone in a certain direction or sound a certain way, we're up on ladders, even adjusting speakers and trying to do little details of movement with the equipment, even just to make sure that as guests are in the queue, that they're getting the best experience from a sound perspective. Last night we were in the theater, I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning or so, mixing, and we were focusing only on the sound effects of the main show. And Scott Gatenio, our main audio mixer on the show, was sitting there, and we were focusing on fireworks for about a good 3 hours, I think, last night, and really just getting all the details of these fireworks and everything from the trail, the whistle sound, the little sparks, the boom when it explodes, and then the aftermath of the sparks flying down, and working on all of those little details with the sound, and then pointing them in different speakers so that when you're seeing it on the screen visually, you see a firework explode over here, you're going to hear it over here. So even if you're on the other side of the ride vehicle, you're going to know that sound and that firework is associated with that sound over on that side of the screen. So it's the movement of the sound across the screen and trying to get all of those details as accurate as possible, because the last thing you want is someone to feel like they're not connecting to the visual and to the sound. And that can easily happen if you just have fireworks in an array spread around you, and you're not really hearing how it would be in the real world. Because if you're going to fireworks somewhere and you're watching a display, you hear where those fireworks are exploding, you hear the sound. So we're trying to replicate that and make it as real as possible, so that the guests don't think about it. The last thing we want them to do is disconnect from the experience. And so we have to do everything in our power from a detailed audio mix to make them feel like they're completely connected.
Yeah, I would think that, with all that detail and the, attempt to be so immersive, that one small thing could really jar people out of that sense of immersion, right? Absolutely. So you've got to be really careful. For context, you said you worked on those fireworks for about 3 hours.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about how long it is in the show? Like how much we're experiencing? Is it 2 minutes that we're working on?
No. We're talking about 10 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, we get it really detailed. I mean, the full show is around 7 minutes or so. So yeah, we're dealing with seconds here, but we'll spend hours on those seconds to make them accurate.
Yeah.
So what are you doing during those hours? Is it like just looking at specifically that point in time and making sure that it lines up specifically with?
Yeah, it's like every firework that happens, and there's a lot of them. I mean, we're singling out every firework that happens in there. So we're giving it its own dedicated time to make sure that the whistle, the trail, the sparkle, the boom for each one is accurate. And we're going to do that, across the board. I mean, every scene, not just fireworks, but it could be wind, it could be water, it could be movement in the trees, and just the sound of those trees rustling and how you make it feel real, and focusing on all the details of those trees.
And then for every one of those effects or pieces of music, you've got to listen back to it, right? You make a tweak, and then you've got to listen back and make sure, is that quite right? And then
right.
Do that. So many different, that's what takes time.
Right. And then you have to play it in context with everything. So once we work on all those individual fireworks, now you have to play all the fireworks together to make sure, are they still all working and coinciding together well? And so it's a lot of, trial and error. Last night, we only focused on sound effects for the entire main show. So we were only working on sound effects. Tonight, we're going to go back in and we're really just going to focus on music for the next couple of nights. And then we have to bring the music and the sound effects together to get the balance right and make sure it's all feeling consistent and cohesive.
Yeah. Brian, you mentioned earlier of working with the creative teams and working with multiple other partners as well. One of the things you mentioned of the sound effects is something like wind. Well, if you hear wind, you're probably also feeling it as well. So what's that process like of working with, maybe it's working with Dynamic Attractions or kind of those other, suppliers or those other designers to make sure that the sound, that your goals and their goals are matching specifically to the full creative goal of the project?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a big component of what we do on an attraction like this, because the special effects and the movement of the ride vehicle are all really important to work together well with the sound. So unlike doing a traditional movie, film, we're dealing with not just a visual, but also movement in a ride vehicle, special effects with water spraying, wind coming down, the scents of different environments. So it could be a pine scent or an ocean scent that sprays out at you as well. And this is all part of the early process in looking at the script and the intentions of what's going to happen, how might the movement happen. When we see the visual, we have to imagine as we're composing and as we're creating what the ride vehicle movement might be, so that we can also create emotional or connected experiences to the movement of the ride or the special effect of the ride. And, there's a section where we're going to be passing over Niagara Falls. And, this is a really big moment. And the creative team really wanted to make sure that this was very heavy and bold feeling because it's Niagara Falls. And you have to be careful with sound, because a lot of times waterfalls can sound like white noise if you don't do it properly. And this is, we've heard it so many times in different places around the world where it just sounds like someone's putting white noise through instead of the getting some of the details of the water in there. And then you're going to have probably special effects happening with spraying at that moment too. And that mist feeling. So there's not just the Niagara Falls moment, but there's also, we need to kind of create the sound to coincide with the spray mist that's happening over you as well. So there's like a lighter sound on top of the heavy waterfall sound. So there's a lot of details in kind of making the sound work together with not just the visual, but also the movement and the special effects.
Yeah. So Brian, think forward to the final product, right?
Yeah.
And you've got it all working together. What does that sound like? What does it feel like for you?
Oh God, it's an amazing experience. At that point, that's where I just want to keep riding and riding and riding, because I just can't get enough of it. And then I hate to leave because I miss it so much. Because when you finally have worked on a project for this long, and all these little components come together, and it finally comes to a point where you see the visuals playing, the music's playing, the ride vehicles are moving, and everything's happening and working and sounding great. And then you get people in there riding and you see their expressions. That for me, I kind of tear up every time I see that, because watching people and their mouths open and their jaws drop and their screams and their excitement is probably one of the most fulfilling experiences you can ever have. When we're working in film or TV commercials, we never see what an audience might say or see, for that matter. But when you're doing themed attractions and you're changing someone's life, you're giving them an experience like they've never had before. That's it right there for me.
Well said. Yeah, I can only imagine how cool that must be to watch the guests and the audience coming off of that, being able to see that live reaction in the moment right there, and like you said, that life-changing experience for them, and that you played a part in that. So really cool. This has just been really enjoyable to be able to chat with you today. So Brian, if people wanted to know more about Yessian music or get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Absolutely. So our website, www.yessian.com, is where we're at. And you can check out a lot of our work on our website there, from all types of work that we do. But we do have a special kind of themed entertainment section of our site, and actually launching a brand new website here in the coming month. So I'm going to have a lot of great content of experiences and attractions that we've done around the world. So and then we're located in various cities too. We have studios in New York, Detroit, Los Angeles, and Hamburg, Germany.
Excellent. Well, Brian, again, like Josh said, this has been a fascinating conversation, especially for me as a former and kind of amateur audio engineer. I just love getting into the granular details of this stuff. So thank you so much for your time. And for everybody out there watching and listening, just remember, we are all Attraction Pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit AttractionPros.com.